Hello everyone, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep, and we are looking at question 123 from the OG 13 Critical Reasoning chapter. This is a bold-faced question that we are looking at. So as always, we will read the entire argument, and then before we go to the options, we will try to first make a prediction as to what is the connection between the two bold parts, or what role are the two bold parts playing in the overall scheme of the argument. So it says museums that house Renaissance oil paintings typically store them in environments that are carefully kept within narrow margins of temperature and humidity to inhibit any deterioration. We know that expensive paintings, as most Renaissance paintings are typically kept in very extremely climate controlled conditions. Laboratory tests have shown that the kind of oil paint used in these paintings actually adjusts to climatic changes quite well. This is something that has been found in laboratory tests, that the paint actually adjusts very well to climatic change, in which case we may not actually require such strict conditions of temperature and humidity. I'm just thinking out loud. So the argument further says, if, as some museum directors believe, paint is the most sensitive substance in these works, so the first bold part is the belief of some museum directors. Then, by relaxing the standards for temperature and humidity control, museums can reduce energy costs without risking damage to these paintings. So now I can easily make out the connection between the two bold parts. The first bold part is supporting the second bold part. Or second bold part is the conclusion that's being supported by the first bold part. Very important, this conclusion is not the conclusion of the argument, but conclusion of some museum directors. Then it says, museums would be rash to relax those standards, however. So now we note the conclusion of the argument, which is it's a bad idea to reduce those energy or temperature and humidity standards. So we also know that the argument disagrees with the second bold part. So museums would be rash to relax those standards, however, since results of preliminary tests indicate that gesso, a compound routinely used by Renaissance artists to help paint adhere to the canvas, is unable to withstand significant variations in humidity. So this last sentence gives you a reason why it's a bad idea to remove those strict temperature and humidity controls. So the argument was pretty easy to understand, and the prediction was also pretty easy to make. The first bold part is the belief of some museum directors, on the basis of which the second bold part has been concluded by the same museum directors. And the argument disagrees with the second bold part. So let's look at the options now. A says, the first is an objection that has been raised against the position taken by the argument. Could be. The argument's position is don't relax the standards. The first is not the objection actually. The second bold part could be the objection. The first, that paint is the most sensitive substance, is not an objection. But anyway, so the first part is definitely wrong. The rest of option A says the second is the position taken by the argument. Absolutely useless. Because the second is the position taken by the museum directors, not by the argument. The argument actually disagrees with that. So A is out. B says, the first is the position taken by the argument, leave it at that. The first is not the position taken by the argument. In fact, the first is not even the position taken by the museum directors. It supports the position taken by the museum directors. So C says, the first is a judgment that has been offered in support of the position that the argument calls into question. That is good, because the first is supporting the second bold part, which is the position that the argument is questioning, that the argument is against basically. So the first part makes sense. The second is a circumstance on which that judgment is based. Absolutely not. The second is the position that the argument is calling into question. So C is out. D says, the first is the judgment that has been offered in support of the position that the argument calls into question. Same as C, absolutely correct. And the second part says the second is that position, perfect. That is the answer we were looking for, because the second bold part is the position that the argument calls into question. So D should be the answer to the question. So E says, the first is the claim that the argument calls into question. Not really, I think it's not entirely correct. The second is the position taken by the argument is totally wrong anyway, because the second is the position taken by museum directors. So the answer to the question is option D. This wasn't a very difficult question because the argument was easy to understand and we could make a very strong prediction which D perfectly matched. On a difficulty scale of 5, I would give this a 3.5. One thing I want to mention here is that I've often seen students in this particular question get overly stuck on the semantics of words such as position, judgment, and claim, and what do these mean, and they will try to distinguish among these terms, something which I think is an absolute waste of time. If you saw the way I was doing this, or if you've seen the way I've done the earlier bold-faced questions, I rarely ever bother looking at such individual words unless it is something very, very clear, such as a conclusion or a premise, in which case you can use those to eliminate. But such fine differences as whether it's a position or whether it's a judgment or whether it's a claim, and then you go through the dictionary to figure out what is the difference between these terms, I mean, that's an absolute waste of time. As you must have seen, I didn't have to do any of that, and I could easily get to the answer. So the suggestion is don't get so bogged down by semantics that you completely miss out on the bigger idea. This is not a particularly difficult question, especially for a bold-faced question. I wouldn't give it more than 3.5 on a scale of 5. Have a nice day.